They had been told to expect humiliation, shouting, the language of punishment. Instead, the room smelled like carbolic and boiled water. A basin waited on a metal trolley, paint chipped at the rim, steam lifting in small ghosts. A stethoscope coiled black like a resting snake. Thermometer in a glass vial. Scissors, suture, thread. A ledger open to a blank page with a stub pencil lying across the top line. Patient name, not yet written. The enemy's first weapon, if it was a weapon at all, was order. Naomi felt the floor under her bare feet plank, scrubbed, faintly warm. She could see desert light cut into the room in thin bands through high windows. She didn't know what to do with her hands. The translator, a young Japanese-American in clean khaquir, repeated the nurse's sentence softly, as if words could bruise. Where does it hurt? Not a command. A choice. Naomi tried to answer and found her throat, full of sand, elbow, rib, the deep ache in the back of her jaw from clenching for months. The place in her chest you cannot point to because it isn't on the skin. She noticed the rule before she noticed the faces. On the doorframe, a white card with 3 typed lines, "Step back, witness present entry by RewroteUSD," could have been wallpaper for how plain it looked, except it changed everything. 2 paces of empty air stood between the threshold and the nearest guard. His hands were open, visible. His eyes were level, not searching. No one crossed without the translator. The door behaved like a door, not a mouth that swallowed people. "Sit," the nurse said, and the translator carried the word gently. Naomi's legs obeyed. The metal stool was cool. The nurse didn't reach for her. She raised her own wrist and made a small, open circle with her fingers, a clear gesture that asked, "May I?" Naomi nodded because nodding was the only bridge she had. The bell of the stethoscope pressed to her dress. Naomi flinched anyway. The nurse registered the flinch, eased the bell, and waited a beat, eyes steady. "Cloth stays," the translator murmured. "You tell, she listens." Naomi exhaled half a breath, then a whole one. The nurse counted heartbeats like a telegrapher counts dots, hearing rhythms where anxiety hears only noise. A light checked her pupils. A tongue depressor tapped the edge of molars without forcing. The nurse hovered near the tender rib without touching. Awaiting another nod, .SUMI stood near the door. Arms folded into herself, watching the angle of every hand. The distance between bodies, the way the nurse kept the kit between them like a small, respectful wall. Sumi carried a little metal tin she'd guarded since the islands, dented lid polished by worry. Ointment had hardened inside into a useless pebble, but she couldn't throw it away. The nurse saw the tin. Her eyebrows made a question. Sumi placed it on the trolley-like surrender. The nurse didn't smile at the sad treasure. She warmed the tin over steam until the paste softened, then let a clean drop from her own bottle fall into the mix. For the rash, the translator said, "Thin layer. 3 times. Wash hands. Instructions, not a lecture." Sumi's shoulders dropped a fraction. Names slid into the ledger one by one, neat columns: fever, skin, tooth, cough, wound. Shame searched for a chair and didn't find one. The nurse set a rhythm. Look, ask, wait, answer, write. She wrapped her own forearm to demonstrate tension. Before handing Naomi the strip so Naomi could touch what would soon touch her. The kit breathed open and shut and open again, leather sighing, metal clicking in a tempo that felt like a heartbeat the room could borrow. Behind them, the line bent and moved. In the tiled room, steam climbed the walls. Shower heads hissed alive. Gray dresses sat folded into exact squares. Combs and white towels towered like small, forgiving walls. Nothing here was pretty. Everything here was deliberate. The rule on the door kept shape in the space. The ledger turned fear into ink. The nurse found Naomi's rib by listening to the breath she didn't finish. On the ledger margin, she drew a small rib and a single line where the bruise lay. No story about duty, no scolding about clumsiness, just a mark that said, "Seen." "We look again in 3 days," the translator said. Sooner, if worse. The words felt like water to Naomi, ordinary, miraculous. She nodded too fast. The nurse's mouth tilted at one corner. Not a grin, just a signal that the pace here was human. When Sumi's turn came for the needle, her hands shook so hard the tray sang. She hadn't cried when her hair was hacked at the pier. She hadn't cried on the transport, but a needle in the hand of someone you've been taught to fear can break a dam. The translator didn't tell her to be brave. He lifted his own sleeve and offered his arm. The nurse tapped the shoulder muscle, slid the medicine in steady and slow, then rolled his sleeve down with a small nod. "I won't ask you for anything I wouldn't accept myself." Sumi breathed out, then in, then nodded back. The showers sounded like rain on a tin roof. Soap weighed heavy and hopeful in Naomi's palm. She scrubbed until gray water ran away, and the last weeks flowed with it. Sumi's towel drank water from hair she'd thought would never feel clean again. Beneath the towel, a voice said, "Take your time." And Sumi cried because permission is sometimes louder than mercy. Outside, a guard wrote the hour on the log. His handwriting was careful, as if a teacher had once told him letters were a kind of respect. He didn't lean in. When the translator stepped away to drink, the guard didn't move closer. The rule stood in the doorway like a pillar. By noon, the ledger had weight. Pages turned from blank to filled. The spine learned to bend. The room learned a song. Boil, cool, clean, dry, bind, breathe, repeat. Naomi left lighter by the weight of fear she'd carried without naming it. Sumi left with gauze wrapped like currency and instructions penciled in 2 languages on a folded card in the mess. A ladle knocked the rim in even time. Milk tasted like a reason. Bread cut clean. Fingers steadied on second slices. A piece of chicken slid off a fork 3 hands helped. No one pretended not to see Dot back at the barracks. The tower lamp cast a square on the floor that made 2 women smile without deciding to. Laughter arrived like a stray cat, suspicious, skinny, still alive. It curled once around ankles and fled, then came back as if it had always lived here. That night, Naomi did not sleep deep. She slept like a sentry, breath measuring noise, hands ready. At midnight, a cone of light pooled at the threshold, then stopped. "All present," a voice said, flat, calm. A pencil signed 2 names into the dark. The door stayed a door. The kit was buckled on its shelf, the whole room still faintly smelling of morning water. Naomi's muscles eased. Sumi slid her instruction card under her pillow. The way people hide notes under floorboards, dawn brought a thinner kind of quiet. Not the brittle silence of bracing for harm, but the soft absence that follows fever. There would be letters later that bent people in half. Men from another compound who believed their authority carried through fences, but the first 24 hours had dug a post into the ground. People now knew the sound of care: leather, glass, thread, paper, and a question that didn't arrest or accuse. "Where does it hurt?" On her way to a work detail, Naomi touched the infirmary frame with 2 fingers. Quick, private, not superstition practice. Gratitude is a medicine with no dosage limit. The guard didn't see. If he had, he would have let it be. Rules and rituals can share space when each remembers its job. The nurse made rounds in the afternoon, not an inspection, a visit. She checked light at beds, drafts by the floor, the roughness of a spring end that could scrape a shin. She asked permission with a hand tilt before she touched fabric anywhere. The kit stayed buckled. Someone asked, "Will the shot make me sick?" The nurse rubbed her own shoulder and made a face that meant, "Sore, no worse." People waved away a worry they had carried like a coin in the mouth. That was the day they learned the difference. Between orders and instructions, orders push, instructions show, orders shrink. Instructions equip. The nurse did not outrank anyone outside her door. And yet her authority held because it came from competence, not volume. When she locked up at dusk, she tore a slip from the ledger and wrote 6 words in English. Then, in Japanese, taping them at eye level: care before custody, first care. Then Custody, the translator, adjusted a character and smiled at the small perfection. The sign didn't change the world, it changed a room. From rooms, roads, sometimes open, before lights out. Sumi counted gauze like paper money and tucked it into tomorrow's dress. She looked at the cracks along her knuckles, already softer. She practiced breathing all the way in and all the way out. No chains, a nurse's kit. A new grammar announced in a whisper. They told themselves day 2 would be the same. Bell steam, gray cloth. Sameness is a trick. The second day wasn't repetition. It was adjustment the way a mechanic turns a bolt a quarter turn and an engine stops knocking. The infirmary door stood open, a hand's breadth to let air exchange. The kit on the trolley looked smaller. like it had passed some of its weight into the room and left confidence behind. The roster had found its stride. Hours marched across the watch log, each line signed with the same careful letters. At 3 o'clock, an erased smudge showed where someone corrected his own spelling. Pride leaves small tracks. On the notice board, a fresh card appeared. Clinic hours in 2 languages. Someone had copied the ledger into straight lines, time blocks, and spaces. People trust what they can count before they trust what they can feel. Naomi's rib returned to the nurse's ear. The bell of the stethoscope listened the way good readers reread a passage to hear the cadence. The wince arrived later by half a breath. Progress you only notice if you're the kind of person who watches for the second hand, not just the hour. A pencil arrow pointed down on the margin. If you only saw the mark, if you saw the hand that drew it, you felt the craft. Sumi brought back her folded card, creased from living in a pocket. "Can I share?" she asked, pressing 2 fingers to her own arm and then jerking her chin toward Naomi. She didn't know which words the question needed. The nurse tapped the instruction line's thin layer 3 times. Washanzan nodded. Sumi's relief made a sound, a tiny inhalation that carried the weight of permission. The second day introduced pain as a lesson, not a verdict. A woman everyone called Auntie Ma steady leaned both hands on the trolley and waited upright, jaw set. A deep ache banging on a nerve like someone slamming a gate. Tooth, not the kind of pain you can outrun or ignore. The room braced itself. Intimacy is scarier than blood. Letting someone inside your mouth when power has meant force is not a small act. The translator stepped half a pace back, eyes flicking once to the door card as if to confirm the rule was still there. The guard shifted his gaze to a knot in the wall and fixed on it. The nurse laid out tools like instruments in a string quartet, gauze, local probe, forceps, pack. She explained steps through the translator, slow and exact. Numb test. Remove the fragment. Pack. Don't eat hot or sharp today. If bleeding, press and breathe. Consent is not just a nod. It's a map people understand before they walk. May nodded, the same nod she had used all her life to accept whatever arrived. The nurse met it with a small smile that changed what the nod meant from surrender to agreement. The needle delivered medicine into muscle. The room inhaled in one long cord and let it out together. The nurse waited longer than anyone expected. Waiting is part of the dose. A blunt probe tested a gum. May's hand stayed quiet the signal. The forceps went in and came out holding a small, bright enemy. People breathed again without meaning to. The nurse packed the socket. The translator gave instructions. May repeated them. The ledger took the hour and the chair number and drew a star a little lantern for future May's checkup. Naomi saw the star and thought of summer lights in her old neighborhood by lunch. Word of the tooth had outrun even the smell of bread, but this rumor didn't terrify. It coached. People asked, did she get the star? As if stars were medals you earned by enduring and choosing at the same time. May walked carefully, jaw guarded by dignity and cotton. When she smiled with her eyes, the whole line upshifted by 1 gear. The nurse pinned a new block of text under clinic hours, fever steps, cough steps, isolation rules, explanation translator, visits allowed. This wasn't the word quarantine that tasted like a padlock. It was a promise that if sickness came, it wouldn't turn a person into a problem. It would turn the camp into a team. By mid-afternoon, the rule met its test, as rules do. A former officer from a different compound arrived with the kind of authority you wear on your face. He marched toward the door like memories were a badge. The guard didn't move. The white card didn't blink. The translator said what the card said and then said what it meant. Entry by request. Witness present, step back. The officer shaped his mouth for a command and then closed it when the nurse never looked at. Himmat Alshi looked at the woman on the stool. Consent, she said. The translator repeated it. The officer stepped back. You could see the moment he realized the new grammar, protection. Here was built of distance and paperwork, and a woman's yes. A small crisis flicked the camp 2 hours later. The kind that could have turned into a wildfire in the old world. Hanikoff, that had shadowed her for weeks, lost her breath hard in the kitchen and grabbed the wall. The nurse didn't come like a sheriff. She came like a clerk, with a list, temperature, breaths per minute. Listen front and back. Rattle or whistle. She wrote numbers, not panic. The cot in the south room was already made. The pitcher sweated. The note on the pillow: if you need water, knock once. If you need help, knock twice looked like a joke someone might make, except no one did. The translator asked Hannah if she agreed to stay overnight. Hannah signed like you sign for mail. Consent changes how air tastes. That evening, the corporal who kept supplies shuffled papers with the nurse and the translator outside. He liked the old requisition schedule because it was what he knew. The nurse wanted bigger orders less often. The translator drew 2 little calendars and a line graph in the dust with a stick. Fewer gaps, more buffer, less chance to run dry. The corporal frowned, nodded, scratched his neck, and put his initials on a form. Logistics is medicine's quiet twin. At dusk, a scrap of pencil letter appeared on the clinic door. Thank you for the tooth. The script was awkward. The gratitude wasn't. The guard added his name to the 20 o'clock line, the hub adjusting with a familiar click into the spoke. The kit closed, leather creaked. Buckles kissed metal punctuation at the end of a sentence the room was beginning to memorize. All present echoed at 1 o'clock. The words landed differently now. Present didn't only mean counted. It meant seen. In the south room, Hannah's cough broke into smaller pieces. She slept in intervals. The nurse's pencil drew a check mark at 3 o'clock and another at 5 o'clock. The ledger held the night like a net holds. Fishdot's sleep that night wore a better coat. It didn't sneak. It showed a pass. Sumi dreamed a sign over a window that read open in 2 languages and woke laughing. Hand on her own shoulder where the shot had made its tender claim. Naomi lay listening to the room breathe like a tide. She knew something you can't unknow in this place. Pain would not be used as a lesson. It would be treated as a task. Morning brought a mundane test, with surgical clarity a simple cut. And then, a miracle no one would grandstand, arrival, red-faced and furious at the world. Too new for rules and already proving them right. The cut didn't arrive with drama. It arrived with hurry and a can of peaches. Naomi twisted the lid with her thumb, felt the jag snap, and watched the metal kiss open the base of her hand. A bright line, a surprised hiss. In the before place, she would have wrapped the wound in the nearest rag and kept going, waiting for someone important to permit her pain to exist. Here, gravity had a new path. Sumi was already beside her, palm beneath Naomi's wrist, walking in a straight line that never wavered. The guard saw the cloth blooming and didn't lunge, didn't crowd. He leaned away, making space, as if space itself could be an instrument. The translator opened the door with his foot, eyes on Naomi's face before her hand. The kit was already opened by the stool, the basin steaming like a small fog. The nurse didn't ask for the story first. She looked at the wound the way a good carpenter inspects grain-angle depth, risk of splinter. Iodine, the translator said. Naomi braced. The sting came clean, not punitive. Rinse, press, wait, press again. Not deep, the translator said. Eyes soft. No stitches. Relief sat down inside Naomi's chest. The ledger recorded the minute, the south room, the third chair, the words cleaned and dressed, and returned tomorrow. Back in the kitchen, someone flattened the can lid and dropped it into a box labeled sharp. Order is revenge against accidents. They stepped into noon with the kind of light that makes nails. Throw shadows like little sundials. Naomi cradled her wrapped hand as if it were a valuable knot, a weakness. Sumi walked at her side, posture taller than morning. Pride is not the opposite of humility when it's built from competence. The camp pulsed with ordinary motion. The mess line folded and unfolded. A broom made soft weather of dust. On a rope, gray dresses flapped like quiet flags. The corporals stamped forms. The watch log collected hours like shells. In the south room, Hannah drank water without coughing and grinned at nothing. Mid-afternoon, the nurse did something radical. She asked for stories. Not the war story kind that are already polished from retelling. The close ones. Where pain hides. Where it leaves. Where fear goes when it's tired. The translator didn't force. He scowled. Naomi used fingers to trace the tender rib and paused where breath had stuck. The translator found nouns the way you find footholds. Sumi showed the rash edge fading to pink and described awkwardly. Honestly, what it felt like to be told take your time by someone she'd been taught to fear. Auntie May tapped her jaw and laughed a careful laugh at how a star in a book could make a woman of 50 feel 10 again. Stories did what gauze. Can't they wove a net across the barracks that caught people when letters arrived, when rumor knocked, when old voices tried new doors, the ledger filled with numbers, the faces filled with context. Then crisis came in the ridiculous holy way. Life insists. Kumi's labor began behind the barracks, knees buckled, hand white-knuckled on the pump handle. The first sound wasn't a scream. It was the word now uttered by a body that was done asking permission. The guard lifted his chin and opened a lane. Sumi's voice cut through the yard clean. Infirmary, nurse, translator. People think emergencies require clever words. Mostly they require trained silence. The nurse arrived already moving focused, small kit banging like a bell against her leg. She knelt without drama. Water, she said. Cloths, they appeared. She set a tempo. Breathe when I touch your shoulder. Hold when I raise my hand. Consent is stranger during birth because your body is making its own decisions faster than any mind can. The nurse kept eye contact, not with the pain, but with the person inside it. The guard turned his face enough to become background. A human boundary obeying the door rule in a field without a door. The baby arrived, furious, wet, undeniable. A sound like a small animal deciding to live. The air shifted the way desert air smells different after a 5-minute shower. The nurse's hands did their quiet math. Color, breath, reflex, bleed. Scissors snipped cotton thread. Linen wrapped the child in a shirt's second life. Kumi's eyes searched for apology. Women are trained to be sorry for needing care, and met the nurse's hard shake. No, the translator put the shake into words. Nothing needs forgiveness. Relief and tears mixed until they were the same thing. What name? Someone asked because that's what people ask to prove a thing exists. Mizu, Kumi whispered water. The ledger wrote the hour, and the names like it wasn't impressed. That was the miracle, to write a birth as if a camp were designed to expect such common grace. The officer with the loud memory found the scene. On his second attempt to reassert a vanished world, he looked at linen, mother, child, the open kit, and the nurse, who didn't acknowledge him because triage sets its own hierarchy. The guard stood. The card ruled. The translator waited. The officer's mouth shaped a command that nobody needed to hear. Then he put his hands behind his back like a man remembering a simpler duty and took one step away. Later, he would carry water. He'd need to learn how to ask first. That was its own education. The mess served dinner without speech. No parade, no announcement, no brave music. Someone taped a fresh list on the board. Bandage checks in the morning. Cough, recheck. Kumi cleared for broth this evening. The corporal initialed a supply delivery estimate with a proud smudge on his thumb. The watch log received its hours. The camp performed a miracle that never makes headlines. It kept ordinary going at dusk. The translator copied a phrase onto paper in Japanese under clinic hours. A line the nurse had said while she watched Hannah sleep. Vital signs are the body saying, "We are here." It looked odd and perfect in the block of neat characters. Naomi stood and read it until the words weren't words anymore. Just a feeling that matched the weight of her hand. The ache that had already dulled to memory, .sumi, visited Kumi and slid the tin and the card under her blanket without ceremony. Kumi traced the instructions with a fingertip, her lips silent, her eyes steady. Later, Sumi would find bruises on her wrist where Kumi had gripped her through a contraction and touched them the way soldiers touch medals when nobody's watching. Night came in on soft feet. All present, the watch called, and present meant counted and cared for. The kit sat buckled in the dark, leather cooling the way iron cools after work. The ledger slept with a pencil holding a place like a finger tucked into a much-loved book in a week. Crates would arrive, gauze, iodine, thermometers nested in straw. The corporal would sign exactly the numbers the nurse had asked for and grin like he'd engineered victory. In 2 letters would spill in, some breaking backs, some mending them. In 4, someone would tack a scrap of cloth over the infirmary window to soften glare. And people would start calling it the flag without saying whose country it flew for. Years later, one woman would be asked what changed her mind about enemies. She would close her eyes and hear a strap pop and buckles click, and she would say, "They opened a bag before they opened their mouths." She would not remember the lecture or the policy poster's font. She would remember leather, glass, thread, and the sentence that remapped the room. Where does it hurt? In 1945, behind a fence in a camp whose name few wrote down, the answer began to change from everywhere to here to less. They expected chains. The nurse brought gauze and rules instead, and that quietly changed the night.